Hi, Kayla.
Hi, how
So
are you?
good. I'm really good, thank you. Yes, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Okay, so really pleased to be able to join you actually, because I've been checking up on Fibre Lab and understood,
Oh,
of course, that you're MA Fashion Futures student.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, amazing. Yes, I've got strong links with that course, so it's really, really lovely to be able to join you today. So that,
Great, thank you so much.
so
Um, so I wanted to welcome everyone back because we've been doing this kind of series of live streams and we've had actually a really good response. So today's live stream, we have Amanda Johnston, who is part of the Sustainable Angle. It's all about like sustainable textiles, and you guys do really great work kind of promoting that and being a really industry leader in that um, area. So it's really nice to have you here to kind of talk about sustainable textiles, specifically in London, and how we're going to move forward with sustainability because it's really big topic and everyone is trying to jump in on the bandwagon on sustainability these days. So it's really great, and thank you again for joining us.
very welcome.
So we're going to be talking about sustainable textiles and how we can develop them more locally. So I guess my first question is what kind of materials can be made locally in the UK? Because there are kind of limitations to these things.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, if you look at any country's industrial development, each country around the globe at some point in history has its own textile development, which is really very much connected to what it grows locally.
Mm-hmm.
So, but of course, those industries have been decimated over time due to globalization, etc. And so we have lost a lot of our manufacturing capacity, both to deal with the raw materials that textiles are made of, and to actually turn them into usable materials. I mean, we still do have some. That's not to say it's gone completely. I think one of your questions earlier when we were sort of exchanging emails was around which materials in particular. So I'm
Right.
going to kind of rewind and start to think about exploring the idea of that history, which is
Mm,
to say there's a resurgence in this thinking right now that you're probably aware of, but I just wanted to share with some of the listeners here is the concept of fibre shed. Is that
right.
something you must have studied that? I'm sure.
Yes.
But of course, this is an ethos that goes beyond sustainability and really is thinking about something that's truly regenerative in a holistic sense.
Exactly.
So, which is actually historically how we used to develop our textile fibers, grow and develop our textile fibers. So, really, it's kind of a return to the wisdom of that, a
Mm-hmm.
return to the sort of inherent sustainability that sits within being local. It
Right.
seems like it's common sense, but actually, I think there's a lot to be learned from these kind of principles that we were dealing many centuries ago with materials that were to hand, animal products that were to hand, agricultural materials that were to hand. So that I think what's interesting now is there's a growing awareness of just the sheer common sense of that, and
Right.
how that would mean that you can ensure trust relationships, you can ensure transparency, and you're not shipping things halfway around the world to make the best of what you have to hand. So I suppose we could say in the UK, if you're talking about being that local, you
Mm-hmm.
would be saying British wool, you would be saying, fibres such as flax, which can be grown in Europe, such as hemp, which can be grown
Mm-hmm.
in Europe. And there's a resurgence in interest in those fibres. We've certainly seen it as an organisation. There's a lot of interest. And also, we're seeing it becoming commercially available. So, because cotton is such a damaging crop to produce conventionally, trying
Right.
to really balance cotton with the use of other cellulose fibres such as hemp, ramie, using some flax, which again are these what we call historic fibres actually. They're
Mm-hmm.
not grown in the same quantities that, say, cotton is because it's a commodity, a huge monoculture commodity, but actually thinking about revisiting those forgotten fibers, the ones that we can grow that are local to us. And but obviously regenerating those industries takes time. So it's not something you can snap your fingers and produce. We do have a very strong old history of British wool, and there are certainly still some suppliers that certainly are producing amazing local British wool and small scale weaving facilities, but they tend to be quite niche. If they're smaller scale, that means they're more expensive to produce, but these are truly amazing traditional materials that are still being produced in those smaller quantities. So hope for that, for sure. And that return, I would say, a return definitely to the fiber shed movement.
Right, yeah. It's interesting that you bring up fiber shed because that's kind of the basis for this Fibre Lab kind of project. But I think one area that's often kind of not talked about is this like mass of urban waste streams that we have. And there's so much potential in these urban waste streams to utilize them locally to create new textiles. And that's something that I don't think we necessarily have the infrastructure for right now. But if we could start using that waste and not just looking at, you know, what we traditionally and historically have been able to produce, wool and cotton and hemp fibers and so on. But if we can actually tap into this other source, then that's maybe a more modern and innovative approach to creating more localized and innovative textiles.
Yes, I agree with you. I think if we, you know, we are living in this crisis situation right now, and certainly with our work, we've been doing what we're doing at the sustainable angle and creating the Future Fabrics Expo, which is our big showcase of dedicated sustainable materials, which takes place in January. We just felt that the tipping point had come literally this year, where the industry was waking up to the urgency of the situation, having 10 years left to limit our, you know, keep our emissions down, etc. There was really it felt like a tipping point. And we thought, okay, we're ready to go. We're ready to really, you know, shift the dial on this. And then, of course, we enter another crisis, which has left everybody in, you know, complete, yes, time to reflect, but complete disarray as well. So we know that we cannot carry on with the same broken systems. That realization had already happened. And so I think what you're saying is, okay, how do we do the best thing the quickest way, because we have such a short period of time.
Right.
And so, you know, talking about waste streams we already have, as you know, Ellen MacArthur's foundation said we're globally wasting, landfilling around 500 billion US dollars a year, either landfilled or incinerators of valuable material integrity. And that's just a crazy missed opportunity.
Right. The idea of waste is just a misconception. Like waste doesn't really exist. Everything has a value.
No, everything has a value. So it's how we reframe and understand, you know, the concept of waste. So I think that was also being woken up to as well. So your idea of thinking about urban waste streams, and obviously I think we're all really aware of what goes on from a point of view of plastics recycling innovation. That's quite far ahead. However, if we're thinking about what we produce within our locale and our city, incredible resources, but you're right about the infrastructure. There's no shortage of innovative ideas about what you might do with a certain fiber category, a certain waste garment or whatever. But the problem is, you're right, getting it through a system. So I think there's huge opportunities for designers to think creatively, but they have to think creatively not just in the usual kind of aesthetic sense, but also be systems designers as well. And this is something that Bethany Williams talks about actually in her practice, is that was absolutely interwoven into her practice. The two go completely hand in hand. And I think I'd just maybe like to kind of point out to anybody that might not know, you know, wool recycling has a 200-year-old history. And there's the area in Prato, just by Florence, is a huge sort of hub there of recycling wool. They do it absolutely beautifully. But their supply systems, what's quite interesting, because I've actually visited quite a lot of the mills there, is they're shipping in quite a lot of the raw material, the used wool garments from the US.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
yeah, I think it's kind of, it will be about a critical mass of supply. Because can you imagine if everybody in your street said, oh, I've got one woolen coat or two woolen sweaters? It's the infrastructure needed to be able to harvest that in a cost-effective way and get the mass that's needed to keep an industrial recycling system going. So those are the challenges. Those are where the challenges lie in facilitating those systems. You're absolutely right. It's not that we don't have innovative ideas and great systems that have already been working for a couple of centuries. So you can see where the potential is. But if we wanted to, for example, become a mini Prato in the
Right.
UK, what would it take to do that? You know, and first of all, it's absolutely supply, because you know the technology to do that is pretty much machine based. However,
Right.
what's really interesting is the sorting is completely human. It's done
Mm,
utterly by hand still, because there's a sorting that goes on with qualities and color. So they
mm.
are sorting in color so they can respin and limit the amount of dyeing, which is really interesting by being very creative by how they sort the batches of used clothing.
That is really interesting. I love talking about systems design because there are all these designers I've been discovering who have really innovative textile materials. They're circular, they're sustainable, they're renewable, like all these wonderful textiles that I'm sure you know about too. And there are all these small independent designers who are coming up with things and MA programs and PhD programs, but I feel like they're not allowed to take this next step into having like a hub for these systems and for these labs to kind of produce and really take their ideas to the next level. And so I'm wondering like what is the first step to in like creating this kind of local systems change that we talk about? Like what can we actually do to start, you know,
Yeah,
building this infrastructure?
it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because all of the steps that it would take to make a material commercially viable. So it means scalable, not like mega scalable, but just scalable to the point where it can become a viable business. It's quite a long process. So if we take, for example, the example of orange fiber, you probably know about that particular innovation. So years ago, it's one thing having the imagination to think, oh, that's an incredible waste stream, the peels from oranges that are very, very plentiful in this particular location in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
harvesting them instead of throwing them away, and having the technology to make sure you can actually produce a fiber from it. That's one thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then you go into the recognition stage, you know, being supported to
Mm-hmm.
find the investment to actually make that a reality is quite another thing. So I know that the girls that developed that innovation have been through a whole series of stages where they need to get their innovation out there. They need to have a partner to enable them to, you know, fund the scalability of it. And then it goes through several stages of smaller scalability, then next partner. And currently they are in partnership with H&M because they produced a very small collection,
Mm-hmm.
their Conscious collection, a few months ago with some pieces in this particular fabric. So until they are sort of released from that NDA with H&M that supported them getting it actually commercially proof of concept, then you're on to the next round. So it can take a long, long time. I think they have the infrastructure insofar as harvesting the raw material. It's the other aspects of production that then become difficult. So it's, you know, investment, existing factory space, all of those things. Yeah. So, but we do need to be looking at solutions that can be implemented as quickly as possible, and which is why I like your idea of what can we do that we have locally. How do we get that into the right system? I suppose I would think that if you were trying to take any existing material stream that you recognize as waste
Hmm.
and you know that it's possible to recycle it in a quite straightforward way, for example, as they do in Prato with the wool, then it would be all about the connections that you make. So I think that what's going to be emerge as a really, really important facility when we emerge the other side of this is the ability to identify the right connections and networks and join them together. So that
Right.
they
It's all
can
about the
actually,
network.
yeah, and it will be a
Yeah.
myriad of different networks, maybe outside of your own specialism. And this is what I think is so exciting, because at the moment we educate and we go into careers that are quite siloed. I certainly did. When I trained as a designer, we're just like, oh, this is the world you operate in, and this is what you do. And
Hmm.
now what I'm seeing through my work with Sustainable Angle is the most exciting things are happening by joining specialisms and existing systems that you would never thought had anything to do with the fashion industry. So there's great potential and excitement there, I think.
Right. So maybe it's about building up that network, coming up with a platform that's localized to your city or
Yeah.
country, and connecting all of those fashion brands or even non-fashion brands that have like a waste stream, like a juice shop or a cafe that has all this amount of food waste, that then there's this other person who knows how to turn that into a textile, and there's another person who knows how to distribute that. And then maybe it's about building that platform. The thing is, there are so
Yeah.
many of these
Yeah.
different platforms that exist, but they have so many specialties. And I think it's about maybe more connecting and building something a little bit broader.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because, of course, now we've all kind of developed the ability to communicate in a much more rapid way. Certainly I know within our team, we actually, because we're all working on different things, that we see each other digitally much more than we would ordinarily, because some of us are in the
Mm.
studio, some of us are working from home. So there's something I think potentially powerful about that, and how we've become so adept at, oh, I'll just jump on a Zoom with somebody in another country, which maybe most of us weren't really doing that much before, and through that creates conversations that then extend, and the loops, hopefully, it feels like that's happening to me, will just proliferate, so that those connections and ideas will come a lot quicker. uh, that's a wish. It feels like that's happening, but it's also a strong wish that will enable us to push ideas and solutions forward much, much more quickly than maybe they would ordinarily happen. Yeah, I think we're living
Mhm.
in super, super interesting times, and so we do have to leverage all of our creativity and kind of
Right.
solution thinking to
I
yes.
think it is a really interesting time because there's a lot of conversation in the media of, well, this is going to stop sustainable practices, or the crisis is going to, impact sustainability measures. There's all this PPE waste, for example.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's giving people the opportunity to pause and rethink how we're doing things. Like, we see how fragile the whole global supply chain is, global supply chain of food and of textiles, and all these things that are absolutely necessity are now being threatened. So I hope that this crisis comes out something positive in the end, where we have a moment to pause and kind of rethink and relocalize and build more regenerative systems. Um, do you think that's something that will come out of this?
I really hope so. In fact, I have to believe so, because it's what keeps us as driving forward. I know initially we felt as an organisation that perhaps like you said, the thing that's going to go first when everybody's budgets get tightened and really, really shocking kind of cuts are being made, that sustainability would be cut first. But of course, that we're not feeling that. We're developing a lot of digital content. So at the moment, we're doing a digital series that you can sign up for on Eventbrite, Materials Solutions
Mm-hmm.
by the Sustainable Angle. We're doing that. We're going into the third week this week. Sorry, next week coming. So that will be around bast fibers and agricultural waste. So it's very timely that you should be asking these types of questions, because that's what we'll be tackling on Wednesday. So it would be great if you could join us for that. And each week we do a different fibre category, and it's possible to choose from a menu. You don't have to see every single one. You can just, check in for a specific one. So that's been really interesting, because when we were developing it, we were thinking, is there going to be any take up? Is everybody going to have their budgets kind of frozen and stuff? But actually we've had some really good interest in that, good take up on it. So it leaves me to feel optimistic for the future, because I mean, let's face it, if you're not sustainable, you don't have a business for the future. If you are not being regenerative and looking after your supply chains and being hyper aware of literally the provenance of everything, how you use it, where it's going, true fibre shed philosophy, then we're really stuffed. I don't think business as usual, it just won't be able to function this way. And I think consumers are also driving that. We've seen a huge upswing, you've probably been studying this, in interest, and consumers not trusting brands that don't make them feel that this is a driver for the brand's value system. So yes, partially keeping fingers crossed, but I also believe it's true that we do have to follow a totally sustainable, regenerative way of doing things. It's just not possible to carry on any other way. So
I agree. And I feel like there is oftentimes this other argument of like, well, sustainable fabrics might be more expensive, or this might be not feasible for the economy. But actually, I think if we have a completely localized and circular and sustainable system, then that actually builds a much more resilient and regenerative, not only economy, but also society as well. Society will feel confident and safe, and you don't have to worry about your food supply or your textile supply. So I think that's also a common misconception, maybe.
I think it is, and it's very interesting. When we first started doing the Future Fabrics Expo, actually, is that designers would come, they'd really appreciate what we do. We do an enormous amount of educational information as well. And they would say, oh, it's so great, but, these fabrics are too expensive. Now, that time, the price differential was slightly larger. It's now closed up to the point where it's really negligible across all different fibre categories, actually. And so that isn't really, but it was never even an excuse in the first place, because you quite rightly pointed out that once you factor in, the cost of that material, if it's local, for example, all the things that you spoke about, but also transport, you're limiting transport, you're limiting, the emissions that go with that, you're limiting, pollution, because you can keep an eye on your local systems, all of these things that aren't actually considered when you just look at the bare price. You can't do this looking at a spreadsheet. You've got to think about everything else that's impacted back through the supply chain, not just the price of per meter of the material.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's great to have so many designers trying to think more about systems these days, because we have so many sustainable fabrics, I'm sure and we have so many innovative ideas that are happening. It's just about putting them all together into a system and building that network to really make it all come together. So I think what Sustainable Angle is doing is really great.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to let you know as well, so anybody's listening that's interested actually in getting their hands on sustainable materials right now, obviously we're all about a physical showcase, which can't really happen right now, and we have a studio where we do consultancies, but until the restrictions are lifted, we can't interact with people that way. But we do also have a virtual expo. So if you go onto our website, thesustainableangle.org, we have a virtual bank there, and there's over 1,000 materials on that. And we've just actually rejigged it, and it's a new version. So we have also the facility to be able to order on certain qualities. And we have small minimum order quantities. So for anybody that's, sort of trying still to sort of develop their products and everything, we do have quite a lot of materials there with small minimum orders. So that's really helpful to smaller brands.
And are those textiles like sourced globally, or are they sourced local to Europe, or are they organized by location as well?
You can search for different fiber types, but not organized by locations. So what we do when we curate all the materials together is we're showing you the as broad a selection, because one of our key messages is around diversifying the fiber basket, not being so reliant on either petrochemical materials or conventional cotton, but thinking much more broadly. So what we tend to do is we organize either by fiber category or by sort of fiber feeling, depending on how we're showcasing something. So, for example, the bast fibers we were talking about, the hemp, ramie, flax, linen, etc., would be all together. And within that, there will be suppliers from all around the world, because we're catering to businesses that are all around the world. But within that bast fiber category, as I was just talking about, they're all pretty much European, apart from a few Asian ones. It depends what the fiber category is, because as we just talked about earlier, the locale is important in the provenance of a material. So yeah, you can search by fiber category, but we deal with something like 200 suppliers globally.
Wow.
Yeah, so that it's from everywhere, super local. If you're here, UK, European, and then we have a lot from Turkey, who do amazing organic cotton, a lot of innovation in denim. We've got the Asian mills, because they've been particularly innovative in recycling PET bottles, fishing nets, etc. So we only feature recycled synthetics, never virgin synthetics, obviously. So it just depends where in the world the innovation is, or the actual raw material supply.
And do you think there is going to be maybe a market for creating a more localized system, like say a platform that has, these are all the materials that are in London or in the UK, and these are all the manufacturers that are here, so we can start to build like a more localized system?
I think that's really needed for the reasons that we spoke about earlier in this sort of fiber shed thinking. It has to be the way forward. And in a way, that was the beauty of having certain products made in certain countries.
Right.
Is that you would associate, this most beautiful silk that comes from Como in Italy, because that's where they do it best. Or, beautiful Scottish tweeds, because that's the place in the world that they do that material the best. And sort of having a sense of place, and kind of pride. And it's like with food as well. There's certain parts of the world that are known very specifically for producing like the best whatever, and you don't want a copy of it, you want the original thing. And I think for me, when I was traveling all over the world, when I was working as a designer in the fashion industry, the best thing was, decades and decades ago, people would go, oh my god, you went to Italy, what did you bring back that you can't get here? So there was that associated to being in different locales. And with globalization, that's become homogenized. And clearly we need to return to that, so that the notions of value that are attached to sense of place are super important. You tended to value much more, I got it from here, it's amazing, you can only buy it in this place, so it's really precious. Now with homogenization, the sense of product tied to place has just been dismantled. Which is a shame.
I think you can oftentimes compare to the food industry, and one thing that kind of gives me hope is this farm to table movement, where this is from a farm up north, this is, you can only get these carrots or whatever, and our cafe is all local and we support this farmer. And you learn about the farmer sometimes on the menu, or the ranch, or the free range chicken or so on. So I think that kind of also inspires me to think, well, I think the next movement is going to be fiber to store. And oh, we just got this made right up here. So I think that that is a really nice similarity to look at food.
Yes,
And
we have to
compare
do. We
fashion.
have to get back. It's the antithesis of Zara, like tons of product that's exactly the same in every single city of the world. I mean, that's the
Right.
the homogenization. I'm sure we've all seen. Anybody who's traveled to 2, 3 different places, whatever you can find in the Zara in London, you can find in Italy and Spain and yada yada. And that's lost. It's lost the thrill in a way of it's kind of cultural expression, hasn't it? We're
It
not
has.
kind of getting cultural expression because we just have the same thing every place in the world. So I think you were talking earlier about society and the robustness of communities, etc., is tied to all that kind of thing. This is what we produce here. We do things this way. We have these skills, these crafts, and we grow this. So yes, that would be a wish to sort of very quickly the whole of every community understanding the value of that and returning to it.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can see also during these really challenging times is that you see communities coming together and being like, oh, you're my neighbor, I'm going to help you. Do you need anything? Let me get you groceries or so on. And I think that's also an inspiring thing of we now are spending more time at home. So we have like a stronger sense of community. You see more people in your neighborhood that you wouldn't often see, and oh, I never noticed that little grocery store was there before, and now you're there all the time saying hello to the same people. So although these are really challenging and scary and sometimes terrible times, but I think on the other side of things, it's letting us reset and rebuild our community and our sense of place and hopefully come out with better, more resilient, sustainable communities in the end.
Yes, that's a wish for the future, isn't it? And so yes, I think there is an enormous sense of optimism, even in the way that you just say, even against this background of unemployment and this terrible health crisis. There is a feeling of underlying feeling of let's looking forward to what it can become in the future. So yes, let's.
And on a positive note,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you so much. It was really nice
You're
talking to
so
you. And you,
welcome, Kayla, and brilliant Instagram. Really think it looks beautiful, and think what you're doing is clearly the philosophy is part of what we need to be getting towards. So super well done, and please do join us on Wednesday for the Best Fibres and Agricultural Waste. And you can obviously see on Eventbrite, you can see all of the other fibre categories as well that we're going to be delivering digitally. So
awesome. Thank you so much. And tomorrow we are actually having one more live session tomorrow with Nina. And we're going to be talking about education and sustainability. So if anyone's interested in that, you can tune in tomorrow around 1 p.m.
Okay, so we're going to spread that. We're going to spread that around as well. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Take care. Bye.
You too.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.